learning from this. In 2025, to support our mission, we'll have to charge for CME credits, and this is doable through an all-access pass. This all-access pass will be differentiated for residents and fellows and for attending level or faculty surgeons. So please join us in the future. If you want to have CME credits, please do it through the all-access pass. So coming 2025, please keep tuning in. Free content, high quality, always available. But please use the all-access pass if you need to claim CME credits. Thank you so much.
Well, good evening from the West Coast, from Seattle, from the Seattle Science Foundation. Today is February 26, 2025, and it's a huge honor to welcome you all around the world to this evening with a spine surgeon, part 2. December 18, we had a phenomenal session that was just incredible with 3 game changers in spine surgery. The 3 brothers Viscogliosi. It's Tony, it's Michael, and it's Mark, John. And they've done a phenomenal job just changing our lives by finding technologies that nobody else did. And at the end of that session, I think all of us thought, wow, they've done so much and there's so much good stuff to go through. Let's do another session, because we literally ended up in the middle somewhere. We sent, by the way, a link out. You can see it here if you want to scan it with your phones from that December 18 program. It's highly watchable, very entertaining, very informative of how to be a successful business person in spine and do a good job for all of us in our care. All of us at the end of that session thought, you know, the 3 brothers have done so much. They're probably going to retire in the near future. They have some biologic programs going on. Nobody was prepared for the news that happened in the new year. And so this part 2 session suddenly gained a whole new sense of acuity. So it's a great pleasure to welcome you here. And again, the co-hosts, my dear friends, Jack Ziegler, Rick Geyer, and Scott Blumenthal are co-hosting. And I'll pass the baton to Jack, who put some intro slides together. So thank you all 3 brothers for giving us.
Thank you, Jens. Let me see if I can get that. Are you guys seeing slide?
Yes.
Are we doing okay? Yeah, so I just wanted to echo what Jens said, and the other co-moderators, Doctors Blumenthal and Geyer, who all enjoy a very long history with the Viscogliosi brothers, and particularly thank the 3 of them for getting together, which was a major event to do in December, and we all had such a good time that we agreed to do it again now. The Viscogliosi brothers, just to bring up to date those who might not have been at the first meeting, founded their company in 1999. It was based in New York City, and we'll talk a little bit about the history. They had backgrounds in securities analysis and investment banking in New York, but they were the first ones who really realized that the musculoskeletal portion of healthcare from the investment standpoint was underappreciated. It was a very small amount of investment in healthcare, and they were able to see the future a little bit and realize that in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, it would be the major portion of healthcare investment. So they were right there. And Robin Young in 2017 acknowledged that they were considered at that time to be the top analysts on Wall Street covering the orthopedic industry. I think Anthony shared with us in December that they've started 42 separate companies, and maybe he'll talk about a 43rd later, and they still have substantial ownership in half of them. The recap for, again, those of you who didn't get a chance to see part 1 or refresh, I'll just give you the executive summary on this one slide, is that the brothers had done research into motion preservation, and they were at the end of negotiating to acquire the Charité disc, and it was really turned down on the eve of signing. And it was close to that time that I think John was the one who said, we better have a plan B. And their plan B was to begin early negotiations with Esculap for the ProDisc at the time. And the 2 things happened that neither was supposed to happen. The Charité deal was turned down on the table, and the ProDisc deal was accepted early in the negotiating. So it left the brothers in a little tough spot because John shared with us that they were eating day-old bagels, sharing an apartment in New York. They were very early in their careers, and they were scrambling. And this is, if you watch Shark Tank, this is when entrepreneurs really step up. Is when they've got skin in the game and they've got to perform. So these guys are self-made men. Everybody needs to keep that in mind. Nobody handed this to them. They worked hard for it. So they started a company called Spine Solutions, and Spine Solutions brought the IDE studies through the FDA for both ProDisc lumbar 1 and 2 level and cervical, and we'll talk a little bit about that history. And those studies began in 2001 for lumbar, and a year or two later for cervical. But in 2003, Synthes became very interested and acquired the ProDisc technology. So Synthes helped complete those IDE studies, did a very robust and extremely high-level training program for surgeons, and grew the market. And then Synthes was acquired, as many of you know, in 2012 by Johnson and Johnson, who thought they were out of the motion preservation business, but suddenly were back in it with what had been their competition, which was now the ProDisc. So J&J had it, and 5 years later, the VBs had done better. They were already into building businesses. John Viscogliosi was now not eating day-old bagels anymore. He was eating good steaks that we all enjoyed together. And they were able to purchase the ProDisc technology back from Johnson & Johnson. So you can see the disc had a pretty circuitous route, but it wound back up in their hands, which was a golden day for arthroplasty in general, because Sentinel Spine, with the VBs on the boards, did a great amount of growth for motion technology in the US. And Robin Young again acknowledged that the brothers have played a pivotal role in transforming the musculoskeletal injury industry. And at the end of that hour, where time ran out a little bit quick, we promised to share more stories about the early days, and hopefully that's what we'll do for at least half of this session. Then we'll talk a little bit more about modern times. So for those of you who do want to recap, Tony Viscogliosi gave the keynote address in 2023 at our motion preservation course, and that's available on Seattle Science YouTube channel, as is the part one of this discussion that we did on December 18. So these are the three brothers. I was going to say a little bit more modern, but still a little bit younger picture. And we'll let them start to take over. But I drew up just some questions, and I'll sort of lead the way again through some history. We'll get some input from the other guys, and hopefully some back and forth between the brothers, as they are known to do. And then we'll go into more recent developments and kind of go from there. So let me unshare and get people back in who we want to see. Is that helping? Are we back in where we want to be?
Just have to do a standard gallery.
Stop share. Okay, there we go. Super. All right. So here's what I wanted to ask, and I think this is where we kind of left off, was with the IDEs being presented to the FDA. Terry Marnay had done a lot of patients. I think he had done 64 patients in France. And then he had incredible restraint, academic restraint, because he did what kind of no other inventor has really done. He stopped, and he wanted to see how those patients did instead of just continuing. So of the 64 patients, if my memory's right, I think there was 61 that was still alive, because at that time it was 7 to 11 years later. Some of them, 3 had died of natural unrelated causes to surgery. And of the 61, I think you guys found 58. Some incredible percent of those patients had them brought to a point where their histories were taken, they were examined, they were able to fill out forms, x-rays were taken, evaluated by an independent orthopedic spine surgeon from the US, and you presented that data to the FDA. And I'd like to hear a little bit about your recollection of how that process went, because I know they granted permission to start the FDA study faster than almost anything that had come before, based on on the strength of that, but it wasn't a smooth transition. There was some arguing and a couple of good stories, I think, in there. So, who was present at that negotiation, or who knew some inside stories that we'd like to hear?
Well, there was a lot of inside. There are a lot of inside stories about that. Maybe I'll just start off and say that none of this could have been done without Dr. Frank McGee at our side. He, some people say, is the fourth brother. Okay. We might say other people are the fourth brother too. So there are many fourth brothers, but Fran McGee was key and essential in working closely with Mark, John, and myself in developing the writing of every word of that document.
And Tony, if I can just give background, Frank McGee is he's a veterinarian, doctor of veterinary medicine, who went into research. Went to do physiology research, I think, with Dr. Guyton, who most of you went to medical school had the Guyton textbook for physiology. He worked in his lab. And then he became educated somehow about FDA regulatory. And he is a smart, basic scientist, clinical scientist, human clinical scientist, and regulatory negotiator. So that's just to kind of lay the framework and lateral it back to Tony.
Hey, Tony, so how did you get hooked up with Frank?
So this is a great story. Great story. So in 1992, I was an analyst at a little firm, Martin Simpson and Company, on Wall Street, publishing research on orthopedics. And the company was going public called Orthologic. And Alan Weinstein was the CEO. Fran McGee was the chief technology officer. And we met for the first time at Sparks Steakhouse, you know, that Italian joint where Gotti took care of one of his enemies there in front of Castellano, in front of the joint.
No relation.
That night that we met, however, but it was in 1992, and sat there at the table during the IPO roadshow for hours, asking questions and understanding about Orthologic. That is,
I think Frank and Alan referred to it as a lobotomy. Is still do is, you know, 6 hour grilling. But go ahead, Tony.
And what I'd just like to say is Fran has gone on with the so that's how we met him. Then we came to work together closely at Orthologic, and then we asked him and Alan to join as the president and chief technology officer, and that's how Fran became part of our team.
But you're not touching where we called him to the meeting. It was 11 at night with cigars in the room till 2 in the morning. But
with you guys.
Yeah. Come on, you guys
partners.
remember that. Mark, you guys comment.
What was Mark doing? Mark was a little boy back then.
He was.
I was, but I was there.
Bringing us cigars.
I was there.
Yeah, you were. Well, go ahead, Mark and John. You got to tell this because and you guys were there. Rick, you came in. Jack, you came in. Scott, you came in. We all had giant cigars. It was beyond 2.
That was the next day, and Stephen Hochschuler was there that next day. But go ahead, Mark. Because you have the best memory.
Yeah.
Well, so let's remember what time frame this was in orthopedics and in FDA. I mean, this was pre-infuse being approved.
Yeah.
Right. This was post the pedicle screw litigation on ABC 2020. That stuff wasn't even settled yet. It was still ongoing. So all of the science around spine was still massively debated as to what were the clinical outcomes, what were the best types of products, all that sort of stuff. So when we were formulating the strategy around spine solutions and how to bring a total disc replacement to market when even fusion wasn't perfected yet, a lot of the anchoring of that thought process was we had to approach this from a level of scientific rigor
Yeah,
that the FDA had not seen before. And
absolutely.
so, in the framework of spine PMAs, by 1999, there had been less than 5 spine PMAs ever approved. Fran had one of them, which was the OL 1000 for spine application. The other ones actually were the BAK, the Ray TFC, the EBI internal stimulation device.
The Brannigan cage.
Brannigan
And
cage.
Brannigan, well, the Brannigan cage hadn't been approved yet, but it had been submitted.
Yeah.
Right.
So our approach was there's only a handful of people in the world who knew how to do this. But more importantly, very importantly, very few people had the bridging knowledge of decades of orthopedics experience from a material science standpoint, actually, that Fran had. Fran, prior to Orthologic, was at the Harrington Arthritis Research Center, where he did experimental research on material science of carbon composite hips, different hydroxyapatite coatings of implants, all these sorts of things. So he brought this incredible base of scientific rigor
Absolutely.
with in-depth regulatory strategic execution of having done spine PMAs before. So he had this, he is a unicorn. He certainly was a unicorn back then. So it was us saying, okay, we need a regulatory and science thought leader that could help us build the strategy of how to actually do this. And it was really Fran that said, we knew about Terry's first generation ProDisc data. We knew about Escalop's development into ProDisc 2. And it was really Fran that said, look, if we're going to qualm FDA's concerns about this, we need to go find every single patient. It didn't matter what it took. It didn't matter anything. We need to actually bring all those patients physically back for contemporaneous clinical, neurological, physical exam and contemporaneous imaging. So this had never been tried before. And this idea of 7 to 11 year follow-up was remarkable. And we brought in a surgeon, Dr. Ray Linovitz, who you guys know very well,
Of course.
a dear friend, to work with Fran. Fran had worked with Ray at Orthologic and had done some work together. And Dr. Linovitz and Fran literally spent weeks, not hours or days, weeks in Montpellier with Terry looking at every single x-ray of AP lateral, looking at, I mean, this is 1999, 2000, right? They're talking about balance and alignment of lumbar spine before, it was even a podium discussion because they're looking at not just the quality of the fixation, the stability of the implant, the flex X motion. They're also looking at, hey, what are happening to these patients from a balance and sagittal alignment perspective, decades ago. And that became the underpinning to then formulate the approach to the FDA, which was, hey, we're coming in to ask an IDE to run a study here in the US, but the reality was a world-class study was already conducted in France, and here's what it was. So that's a little bit of the history and a little bit of the story there.
We affectionately called that Marnay study on the large French primate model.
I'm not sure the French would call it affectionate.
Yeah.
So
Because a lot of the regulatory science around that time was, well, if you're developing a new technology like this, you really should conduct animal studies.
Yeah.
And one of the principal arguments that Escalop made in the development of ProDisc 2 was standard materials, cobalt chrome, ultra high molecular weight polyethylene, primary fixation, the central keel, secondary fixation, which was the plasma pore coating on the implants. All of the classic orthopedic principles that you would see in large joint arthroplasty and trauma fixation were incorporated into the original thesis and design of the implant, as well as Dr. Marnay's clinical proposition that you're implanting a device into a diseased patient, so the device has to respect that, not restore normal kinematics. We've now seen a couple of decades later the impact of trying to restore normal kinematics. It doesn't always work. And when you try to add funky materials to it, you really could get catastrophic scenarios. So all of that, what I would say, decades of wisdom born out of clinical experience and a deep appreciation for the scientific foundations of these orthopedic principles all came together on ProDisc. And that to us was, looking back on it is now a joy to see that hold true to the North Star of what's important for surgeons and for patients.
Well, in going after those 64 patients, we hired private investigators to track those people down all over Europe and found them and went after them. And the main principle was exactly to what Mark said and Tony said. So we wouldn't have to put them do an animal study. So we would not have to do a pilot study. And the landmark on that study was not only was it one of the first, I mean, is similar to Charité, ran their study earlier, but Charité did not have a coating. The impact of the coating was absolutely massive at FDA. And ProDisc was the first product for spine ever approved with a coating, a titanium coating. So we all talk about the disc and the importance, and FDA didn't even know how to test it. So actually our test that we created with ProDisc became the ASTM standard.
Yeah.
And I just for the audience want to point out, in a way, this was lucky. Going back to the session 1, December 18, you were actually making a play for the Charité disc, my good old product, which has no ingrowth, which has a very forced kind of a insert placement. This would have, in retrospect, been suboptimal, as we all know. You somehow, through the fate of, first of all, really good preparation, but also foresight and the constellation of great minds coming together, had a clearly superior product. The Charnley corollary of modern day hip arthroplasty, bingo, happened there. From that generation 1 to generation 2, how much was there a change of the generation 1 ProDisc to the generation 2? Was there a big metamorphosis?
So, no. So what was changed is how it fixates to the patient. We did not touch the biomechanical function and the principle of the design of how the disc worked. So we said, okay, how do we make it easier to implant? We integrated the instruments with the implant, so they were built together, designed together to co-function to allow ease of implantation, because we knew of the challenges. The original version 1, had 2 keels up and 2 keels down, and had a much smaller footprint to cover the vertebral bodies.
And John, I think the poly was locked into the inferior component in the factory, so it was an
Yes.
on-block insertion.
Right.
And weren't the end plates titanium on the original?
Yes.
And they were
Correct.
changed to cobalt chrome. So I think the material changed because of the articulating couple.
Right. Just imagine. Oh, sorry, John, go ahead.
Let me do a quick.
Well, I was going to jump to cervical, but let's finish lumbar.
Before you jump to cervical, quick shout outs here to the original Escalop engineering team, which included Boris Beiersdorf, Stefan Eckhoff, Christoph Geisert. And also, if we want to talk about the original concepts of where this came, it came out of JBS, which was the French company that Thierry Marnet had partnered with, that Escalop acquired. A good colleague of ours now today, Guillaume Joseph, was a sales rep and learned spine in Thierry Marnet's OR at JBS. And now it's fortuitous that we have the opportunity to partner together with him once again, all these years later. But that's for the second half of this conversation.
I think it's also valuable, Mark, to comment on Anton and Dr. Harold Stallforth and their
and Chris Henningfeld.
Yeah.
The whole Escalop leadership team and consisted of Professor Dr. Michael Ungetun, who was a colleague of Alan Weinstein's in metal tribology, Dr. Volker Daum, who is the legal counsel there, Christoph Henningfeld, Dr. Harold Stallforth, who was the head of R&D of all of Escalop. He worked with Dr. Wilhelm Blomer, who was the head of R&D of orthopedics. Anton Shelkley was head of marketing for Escalop Spine, and the product manager that he worked with is a lifelong friend of ours, Gutmar Eisen, who really was in the mix there, and who you guys have come to love and appreciate and value. So that whole nucleus of that team really spawned the dawn of the modern era thinking that now exists today of in and around arthroplasty.
And the proof of the pudding of that, to allude back to what John said, is the instrumentation has remained virtually the same for 26 years, and it functions wonderfully. I mean, it's one of the highlights. Yeah, exactly. How many devices can say that? Most devices that are still using 20-year-old instruments aren't on the market anymore, or they're not doing well on the market because they weren't designed to coexist or co-function with the implant as ProDisc was. So the Escalop engineers did a great job.
So Jack, we branded this as a total technology solution, including the implant, instruments, and the procedure itself, resulting in removing pain, restoring form, function, and motion.
One other important component of this was, I mean, obviously Terry's genius in the conception of this cannot be understated. But also in the mix, we thought it was important to get other surgeons as the core foundation around Terry. And
absolutely,
that was Dr. Rudy Bertagnoli, who you guys know very, very well, and Dr. Michael Meyer, because in Europe, a lot of the surgeons also, the mini ALIF access approach, Michael basically invented with Escalop in 1985. So that whole concept of not just the implant, but Rudy's contribution to the instrument design and seamlessness of it, and then Michael's contribution to an integrated procedure from an access point of view, really taught us everything as a business person you would ever want to learn of how to make a surgeon's life easier and more reproducible and more consistent. And we look from them.
And we absolutely have to credit Escalop for bringing this team together and for bringing the design together, and why they accepted our proposal so rapidly was because they did not have the presence in the United States with the regulatory authority of the FDA to be able to even remotely try to get a PMA approval through an IDE submission. Because What we brought to the US was different material, 2 keels to 1 keel, a complete different instrument set, a complete different procedure access,
And Fran McGee.
and Fran McGee. And that formula created a IDE approval in 30 days without a single comment from the FDA. So a long set of answers to a short question.
So how did you guys, just to move on to the next step, how did you guys pick your sites and investigators? And then I'd like to go into also how you guys agreed to let TBI, who was already the primary site for Charité, also be what turned out to be your primary site for ProDisc at this extraordinarily competitive moment in time. But first off, how did you?
Because Steven was beating the heck out of
Oh,
us.
Steven,
I'll
Steven
never
was an animal.
forget that at the hotel where the first arthroplasty meeting was being held in Germany, where Michael Meyer was a host, and there was a side area and there was couch and chairs, and I think maybe the three of you piled on after, but Steven started. I mean, Steven Hochschuler just demanding, and it was like, oh my God.
Well,
But anyway, I just jumped on that. But Mark, you can.
No, that's very accurate. I mean, he
As-
came back. He said, "We are going to do both. I am going to convince
Oh
them
yeah.
Oh yeah.
to-"
So, I mean,
There was a lot of debate internally about whether we should go to you guys at all, given that there was a connection with the Charité.
Well,
But
no
you
one.
guys convinced us.
yeah.
No
And
one
Mark,
ever.
you should tell the story. Go
No
ahead,
one
John.
ever did that. Use the same site for a competing product. That
Or
was
has
also
since.
the first thing.
I don't think anyone's done it since then either.
No,
So I'll use an analogy for how we picked the sites. The 1927 Yankees was we thought this was the chance to really pull together the best surgeons in the world who represented every different company, because by this point, the late 90s, surgeons were committed to their camps. You had the Danik guys, the Acromed guys, the DePuy guys. You had all of the surgeons had declared loyalties essentially
synthase, right?
to the Synthes guys to each of their to each of the companies. So what we
And the
did,
Zimmer spine guys too.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Mark.
Salter
Sorry.
Medica,
Right.
actually, yeah. So what had happened was we knew, because obviously we had studied very closely the space. This is where we went to all the best of the best that we could identify, many of who you guys obviously know and work with and have enormous respect for, to really pull together a cross section of the
Absolutely.
leading companies in the space with their best surgeon advocates, best surgeon thought leaders to be leaders in this study. And the strategic reason was that if we got this cross section of surgeons who are normally competitive on the podium in the fusion side of things to align to arthroplasty as an outcome, this was going to create a very strong competitive M&A response potentially from all these companies. And that's what we were trying to do, was to create a frothiness in the market that got people really excited about this, because they could say, oh, wow, well, the Medtronic guys are sitting there saying the DePuy guys and the Acromed guys are in on this. We don't have access to them any other way. ProDisc can be a way for us to be able to get access to them.
One good example
today.
of the business brawl that took place to pursue certain of the clinical sites. We had a brawl with Medtronic over Dr. Zadeblik and his site, to the point where Medtronic flew out a private jet to with
Tom.
to Tom, and they were relentless because he was going to be a clinical site for the ProDisc, and he had agreed with us to do it. Then Medtronic stepped in and put the love all over Tom, and
Mike Domain was not going to let that happen. He had already lost Foley, who had agreed to be a site. We were targeting Tom and Hal Matthews, all to be sites. And,
and
that
Medtronic
was,
put the love on both Tom and Hal.
Hal.
And of course, Hal was very instrumental in the Maverick disc. That there's a whole nother story about Rudy and us. That relates to that Maverick.
That could take an hour in and of itself.
And can I tell the quick story about how I got to be the first site, even though it was supposed to be Frank Camisa at HSS? The study started in the first week of October of 2001. It started just 2.5 weeks after 9/11. So I'm not sure how you guys smuggled Terry Marnay into the country, but he was in New York with you. And the way the first week was supposed to start is that he would do cases with Frank Camisa on Monday at HSS. Then you guys would get out to Dallas, and I had 3 cases lined up on Tuesday, and then you were going to drive to Tyler, Texas to do 3 cases with Guy Danielson.
Yep.
So apparently Sunday night, the legal folks at HSS started, I don't know what got lawyers into the hospital on a Sunday night, but they started sniffing around and they didn't like the consents, or they didn't like the idea. And they canceled the surgeries and let you and Frank Camisa know. So the schedule shifted, and you wound up still coming to Dallas, where we got to do the first cases. And somebody at Spine Solutions had already leaked to the press that the first ProDisc was done, if you remember, at HSS, and it was distributed, but it was after the fact when it wasn't done there. It was pretty funny. It was pretty funny.
Yeah.
So it's amazing how those things worked out. But it's interesting to hear the business side of the competition, because as Scott and Rick know, we were all on the podiums, in opposition. So, Rick Delamarter and I were always, talking about ProDisc results.
Right.
And then Paul McAfee and Scott or Rick were talking about the Charité, and then Hal Matthews was talking about the Maverick. And it got abrasive, and it got mean
brutal.
sometimes.
But,
right. But now I understand that there was also a business side of it that I was interested in hearing how the investment world was also reacting to it.
Yeah.
Hey, Tony.
Can I ask a couple questions?
Sure.
Can I just ask Tony one quick?
Pardon?
Yeah, Tony, I answer real fast. Tony, so going back to the competition among the different companies, when Rick Deo had requested Medicare or CMS to give a non-coverage decision, will you talk about the impact that made? Because he was paid for, I believe, by Medtronic, and they were doing this.
Exactly right.
Okay, so
Medtronic understood that we had a leading position and they were far behind. Michael Domain directed a brilliant move by recruiting Dr. Deo to make a submission when there was no U.S. clinical data, to make a submission to Medicare to seek a coverage decision. It was impossible to get a coverage decision, but that was precisely the business strategy of Medtronic, was to kill our ability as Spine Solutions to compete from a reimbursement point of view, because they were 3 years or so behind where we were. So they figured that would slow us down and allow them to catch up. Well, that was a titanic failure for everyone in the total disc replacement industry, of not just the businesses, but the patients were damaged the most by that business strategy.
I would say,
brilliant business strategy.
I would go one step further. That was the beginning of the end for all of medical technology, new technology development. It rolled through every other sector in cardio, in women's health, in peripheral vascular and neurovascular. What happened was that was the moment where payers looked at each other and said, "Oh, wait a minute. We can
We have
actually deny
power.
this stuff. We have power. We're actually going to start denying all of this everywhere." 2005 was the fundamental change in US healthcare. Go back and research it. Payers did not have, they didn't really deny, based on prior authorizations, any significant surgery that a surgeon said that they could do.
And
When
once an implant was FDA approved, they
correct,
would,
correct,
yeah, that was
correct.
just a given,
It
right?
was a
So
given. It was a given. Sorry, Tony. I
Yeah.
wanted to elevate the importance of that maneuver because while it was tactical to total disc replacement, it had a far-reaching impact across all of medical
a
technology.
fundamental change in all of medical technology from the business fight of market leadership and total disc. Great question.
All right.
Thank you for that.
Go ahead, Scott.
All right, can we maybe go this a different direction? And there's really two things that I would like to talk about in the last, whatever, 15, 20 minutes. Number one is the strategy of a motion preservation company, to the extent that you can talk about it, that's announced the acquisition of a legacy spine company and how that fits with the strategy of the motion preservation company. And then I have another question after that, but I want you guys to maybe discuss that for a few minutes.
Maybe let me take a lead in that commentary and say that take a look at the last video interview that we did, where the brothers were literally in the midst of this deal that has been announced of Viscogliosi Brothers Spine acquiring Stryker Spine. We couldn't talk about it at all at the time, of course, because it was
we so wanted to. We
Yeah.
so wanted to.
but I was able to get a little word in. Wouldn't it be interesting to mix motion with scale? And that, my friends, is exactly where this world is going. So the Viscogliosi brothers understood through the activity that John led at Sentinel Spine that scale can occur. John proved it with leading the Sentinel Spine business to where it is today now at nearly 100 million in pro disc sales. That's just Sentinel
kudos
Spine.
to the entire Sentinel management team. Steve, Varun, Jason, Steve Sanderson, Jim Curris.
Absolutely.
You know, the Ron Christensen.
Even all the RMs, they signed,
made it happen.
Executed.
So the further short comment is we understood the value of scale. We recognized also that there is a place for fusion and there is a place for motion. And there's a place for even earlier stage therapeutic solutions. So what we should do as the Viscogliosi brothers is own the world of solutions depending on the dynamic that exists in each individual patient. And we should be the sponsors bringing innovation wherever we can find it to the patient suffering from spine pain and to the physician who's troubled with the solution.
Okay, you've given me a question 1B before I get to question 2.
Sure.
So by acquiring or merging with a fusion line, which is, as we all know, much more lucrative than the motion line, are you basically putting the motion line to like just from an incentive basis, your surgeons, your salespeople, they're going to make
Oh,
more selling the fusion line from this new company than they will the motion line. Are you putting motion to the second class?
the short answer is no. And let
And
me
how?
please explain. First of all, Sentinel and VB Spine are two separate businesses today. The brothers are the shareholder in VB Spine, as has been announced, and the brothers are the largest shareholder of Sentinel Spine. They operate separately, and they will continue for some time in that manner, I'm sure. However, this is why we're not total disc or motion preservation is not going to be second class citizen. It is because of the opportunity for a large, well, let me say it even better. In fusion, prices have gone down for 10 years, every year. Cost of goods has gone up for 10 years. Salesmen's commissions has gone up for 10 years. The profitability in pedicle screws is not where it was 15 years ago. The profitability in total disc has remained the same. So from a business point, this is a moment for total disc to grow significantly, because finally the chess pieces have moved on the board such that the profitability of a pedicle screw is not what it was 10 or more years ago. Mark and John, let me toss it to you guys.
So
So I guess the question is, will you have the same distributors selling the fusion line and the artificial disc line, or will you do different ones? Because at the end of the day, the distributors still make more on fusion products than artificial disc. And how are you going to, if you do the same distributors, incentivize them to still promote motion?
wow.
I know. You know,
So that Scott, that's so as Tony said, VB Spine, Stryker Spine today, VB Spine tomorrow sells their product line in their business. Sentinel Spine is an independent company to VB Spine, and they need to do what's best for Sentinel and drive sales for that shareholder group that we are the largest part. We don't have a crystal ball, nor can we really disclose in the future how it works out, because we still haven't closed on Stryker Spine. I mean, the value, what we saw at Stryker Spine is an incredible sales force. Meeting these guys where they've been able to hold serve without a new product in 4 years and not been a market share giver, it is amazing to me. So if you look at Stryker Spine and what we saw there in the technology there, so we talk a lot about technology. The technology there is the sales force and the organization and the breadth and depth that we'll now have, that small companies needs hundreds of millions of dollars and years of being unprofitable and more hundreds of millions of dollars to get there, where we have now, or will have once we close, a platform that will be the number one largest spine company that's independent number 4 in the world. And in many markets around the world are number 1. So the technology that we bought is the human technology, the human capital. And then if you listen, if you remember what we were talking about, how we created Spine Solutions, how we drove through the FDA, how we worked on products, how we developed the Protis cervical, which I have 2 in me. The Protis, that's why I'm pointing at my neck. The Protis cervical in 9 months from saying, let's have a cervical to first implantation in a human clinical trial. 9 months. That is not solely because of technology. There was something there. It was a human capital that we all talked about in the names that we named and the surgeon group that we built around that, that really delivered on the opportunity of the disc.
VB wants.
Listen, hey, John, Tony, and Mark, I think this was actually in your typical fashion. I think it was a very fortuitous and, forward looking decision that you made, because I came back from the summit meeting last week and I thought it's going to fall over. Larry Lanke gives a talk and he says, in the future, I believe that motion preservation will play more of a role with our
Yes.
deformed patients. So here you have the number 1 motion preservation company now buying all this other access. And I think that, what all of you just said, and you having the human capital and also the smarts that the 3 of you have, hopefully we'll see this even flourish more.
That's our hope. We can't disclose plans in the future, but that's our hope. And I think that there's an opportunity, to do that. The one thing that I didn't touch on, Scott, that I think
Well,
we haven't talked about or touched on, and why, motion will not become a second-class citizen, because what we created at Sentinel with the outreach of patients and the stories and regaining their life and the stories that you have. And I believe that the patient population will more and more demand the opportunity to have a motion preservation device than just a fusion alternative.
And to paraphrase Jack, we've drank the Kool-Aid. We're
Oh yeah,
100% into motion on this call here. So question 2.0, just to be provocative, we only have like 7 minutes left. Orthofix pulling M6 off the market. Good or bad? Good thing or bad thing for the cervical arthroplasty world?
great thing for cervical arthroplasty. When the product doesn't work, when there are catastrophic failures, the business has a duty to remove it from the market. For whatever reason Orthofix has put out.
We're glad Orthofix took the high road here.
Yeah.
It was the right thing to pull it from the market.
I think everybody is. Everybody is.
We're glad, and obviously we care deeply about the patients that will continue to have M6, and I think Orthofix committing to follow those patients to carefully track them is really important, because at the end of the day, the integrity of all of us is about doing the right thing, and all of us play a role in that. And my hat's off to Massimo and the team there by making the tough choice, because Wall Street doesn't like when products are pulled off the market. Shareholders don't like that. The stock took a hit when they announced that they were doing that. Bravo and kudos to them for doing the right thing there.
That's
because it does force all of us and hold all of us to the continued high integrity standard that your patients deserve.
And just to be very clear, okay, fusion has been growing about 0%, okay, as a type of procedure, where motion has been growing nearly 40% per year in the hands of sentinel spine as a procedure of choice by patients and by physicians. So at VB Spine, we want to deliver superior clinical outcomes. The same is true for Sentinel, superior clinical outcomes. And to every Sentinel sales rep that's listening to this, sell more, okay? Because it's best for the patient and the right properly selected individual, and U.S. physicians understand that so totally well.
It's really the educated patients that have driven the increase in sales, but in use and in success of arthroplasty. And surgeons are the last ones to be thankful for the legal profession, but it was really the class action lawsuits that came out of California by patients who knew that there was something better that was not being authorized by their insurance companies, who forced medical policy changes by major insurers when we've been unable to do it as doctors or as organizations or as companies. Even working together, we were not able to effect that change. It was really the groundswell of patients. And we see that getting stronger and stronger because of social media, internet, and patients are just more savvy, and good results are abounding. So patients are always asking that question, why didn't that doctor offer this to me? That's why I'm here for another opinion, which is great for us, but it's where we need to be pushing the market is really to the patient themselves.
So
But you're right, Jack.
it's
The patients are going to
interesting.
drive it.
It's interesting. We talked about this strategy of how Medtronic kind of hurt everything, but we won't talk about. It's interesting how that strategy got created in California and ran and got done.
On the big picture perspective, so cervical spine arthroplasty on the patient level now is actually the procedure to do. And I want to, again, credit our TBI colleagues and Rick Sasso and a couple of really big game changers for making that very clear. And my patients here, they prefer to have a non-fusion surgery. The word is out. I remember a projection by Goldman Sachs when the FDA approvals came out that the lumbar disc market would be exploding big time, and that never happened. With the market changes here, you're now the main show. You're the only show for lumbar discs in North America. Do you see this evolving and finally catching on, especially with the Thierry Marnet and the phenomenal long-term outcome papers?
So Jens, when we bought at Sentinel Spine, when we bought Protis back, lumbar had about 20 or 30% of the US population reimbursement. Because of that lawsuit and because of strategies executed by the team at Sentinel, there's nearly 100% of the US population now can get insurance coverage for lumbar disc and the 2-level. And I think us getting the approval for the 2-level, where somehow J&J and Synthes for 15 years couldn't get it approved. But we did in 6 months, within 6 or 8 months after purchasing, helped us a lot and brought further validation. When we bought Protis Lumbar, it was about $300,000 a month. High month was about 500,000 in revenue. And I don't remember the lumbar revenue last year, but I think it was about $25 million of lumbar revenue, and now continue to growing. So basically in get everything straight, get it up, do that work. We'll call it 2000. So in 4 years, we've essentially 4x the revenue of Protus Lumbar. And the whole team has done an outstanding job. And I really think, so we just bought Stryker Spine, or signed to buy it. A lot of posterior, as Tony said, that never went away. But from the cases I've been in, anterior access and at the teaching institutions, the fellowship programs, we need to support more anterior access understanding, because I've seen those patients, you know, how well they do, and you've seen them. So I'll stop
every day.
So I would say the short answer is we absolutely believe lumbar total disc replacement will become a significant solution that will grow continue to grow very rapidly in the future.
I think it's the sleeping giant. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But here's the elephant in the room. They said, and you gave a great talk about how we can change the reimbursement for artificial disc. I don't know that it's going to happen. I think patients are just going to keep on demanding it. And maybe the insurance company will wear down, because I don't see it going through the process, because it's so complicated between the RUC, CMS, and everybody else. Kim Norton gave a great talk this past weekend at the summit. And she was saying that, if we can get the Medicare just to rescind the non-coverage. They don't have to approve it, just rescind the non-coverage. Maybe that would help. And that is doable, but I don't see going through CMS.
We've got to talk to Dr. Oz about that.
That's okay. Right. Hey, listen, guys, the hour has raced by. It's just been wonderful.
We have to do a version 3.
Yeah, we need to do.
But you guys you're game changers. I mean, you really changed the face of spine in the last 25 years. And, we've been just thrilled to be along for the ride with you. We've helped a lot of patients. That's the bottom line. We see a lot of our long-term patients come back for other issues or with family members, and to a person, they almost always say, "This changed my life, and I wish I had done it sooner." So we couldn't have done it without you. We thank you very, very much for everything you've done. Thank everybody for listening and attending. Jens, thank you for the Seattle Science Foundation being the platform for all this. And it's just been terrific knowing the VBs and being your friends. So congratulations.
We're honored.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. It's been a great partnership, guys.
And it's not yet.
We're just going to say
about the partnership and working together to end up helping that patient. And so I'll just close with this. One of the most incredible things that I remember is when we brought everybody together for the first meeting of the clinical investigators. And at that time, you guys, that clinical investigation team was, oh my God, these are the luminaries right now. And we thought, how are we going to be able to control and direct a lot of strong personalities and get to where we want to go? And I still remember that and standing there in awe, because I've never seen it really again outside of that group when it met, where you guys all checked your egos at the door, and it was about, how do we get this across the goal line, and the vision that you all saw of how it would help the patients. So, and when I mean you all the doctors who have participated in the clinical trials, to help bring these technologies forward. And I see Dr. Askewian sending in, we need to do part 3.
Oh,
Listen, we could. I think there's so much to talk about.
Gentlemen,
future.
thank you. Jens, you want to close it out?
So
Thank
the
you.
magic of three great brothers, and again, we said it before, a unique interaction style is the number one with, from the financial world to industry to physicians, is personified by you. This was, again, the Mark story from last time. I encourage everybody who didn't see that to listen to how this young brother was sent out to kind of do the scouting. The second thing is, again, the unique communication style. And again, John pointed out very well how the egos were checked at the door, a very magic, big concept. And then the third thing is, again, what I just find remarkable is you've changed our game also by making spine credible with really quality research. So this has to be pointed out, and this is unique because research costs money. Research is frustrating. The FDA changes the rules of the game. Oh, 2-year follow-up, oh, 5-year follow-up, oh, 10-year follow-up. I mean, you never blinked an eye, and you had quality people with our TBI colleagues, just again, being side by side, but the quality research has made us credible when we're questioned. And so I want to thank you from the bottom of our heart, collective spine surgeons that we are, for this magic trifecta.
And Jens, I think what gets missed is total disc replacements are the most studied, the most level 1 data of any medical product in the world.
Any implantable medical device. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to give a plug for Terry and for our data, the revision rate up to 20 years is less than 1%.
It's unbelievable.
Total hips and total knees are 10 to 15% in both the. So anyway, great job, guys. Our patients love you.
Thank you.
We love you guys.
Oh, we love
Thank you, guys. This was awesome.
And
Good night.
bravo on the next
Good night,
event.
everybody. Thank you, VBs.
Well, we look forward to pulling the next rabbit out of that.
Absolutely. Well, we want to hear about that.
Now people are going to start, oh, what are they doing right now?
Yeah,
Because
we're
Tony
expecting
leads
it.
that in. Excellent.
All right.
Have a great night. Thank you.
Good night,
Take care.
everybody.
Have a good evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye for now.
Bye for now. I love it.
Bye-bye. John, see you at Chamberlain's.
Yes.
Anytime.
Okay.
Forward.
Anytime. And you can bring your brothers too, John.
Yeah, but I don't want to.
See what happens?
John, this time we'll make sure you get the bone.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right. Take care, guys.
All right, take
Good night,
care. Have a
everybody.
good rest of the evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye for
Thanks,
now.
Jens.
Thanks, Jens, Corey, and Hannah.
Have a good night.